We're online. Here you go,
Q&A.
Andrea.
Okay, thank you, everybody. I love the Q&A, so I'm going to try and shorten my stump speech. I'm Andrea Suarez. I am your neighbor. I live at the Austin Bell, and I have been here for 15 years. I am from the Pacific Northwest. I've got this great little flyer. You might have seen it around town. I grew up in primarily Oregon, went to Oregon State, have been a operation and sales executive for DHL Logistics for 25 years. During the pandemic, as most of you know, I founded We Heart Seattle and am the executive director, really birthed out of frustration, but also just like inspiration of all of the folks that came out after downtown was destroyed in May of 2020, May 31st, when everybody came downtown and cleaned and went down to Ace Hardware and cleaned up the glass and the graffiti and everything that was associated around George Floyd's death. Rightfully so. And the outrage from that, I just was overwhelmed with the idea of what if we harnessed that like level of volunteerism year round and as a movement for a more beautiful and safe Seattle for all to enjoy. So September 14th of 2020, we founded We Heart Seattle. And after I exhausted, calling SPR, SDOT, police, the parks, the mayor, the council, the Find It, Fix It app, the Adopt a Street, and decided to go pick up some Home Depot supplies and what's now 1.3 million pounds of trash removed from our city, including 35,000 needles and hundreds of people off the street through our model of giving a hand up versus a hand out. This program is using no taxpayer dollars and really turbocharged by people just like you and Rotarians to come out and volunteer with us to make a daily difference. And what I've learned is there's a lot of things that are working and not working when it comes to addressing homelessness, the fentanyl epidemic, and the intersections with the decimation of our environment, green spaces, and public safety. Those things all really go hand in hand and really are 100% rooted in untreated mental illness and drug addiction. As we think about downtown, as we think about people on the streets, tents in our park, people under the highway, tents, RVs, and 3rd Avenue is around fentanyl and methamphetamine. So just want to bifurcate. There's a lot of other very homeless people in need, families, veterans, seniors, people with mental and physical disabilities who are not the folks on the streets committing crime every day. So I just really want to make sure that you understand. I understand there's different demographics of homelessness. This is the ticket I'm writing on because I am a subject matter expert on these very issues that most deeply affect our backyard, and why when this open seat became available, I threw my hat in the ring. And here I am, your state house representative for the 43rd position 2, which backfills Frank Chop's open seat after 30 years he retired. What differentiates me from my opponent is that I have a deep connection with this city on the beat, with the new council, with city stakeholders like John Scholes from the DSCE, parks, cops, fire, Rotarians, community, Belltown United, the Condo Connection Group, Belltown Community Alliance, South Lake Union Chamber, Downtown Chamber. I am connected and can bring that bridge to Olympia, which has not been something that we've seen in the past. So, and I'm not an ideologue. I don't come with preconceived agenda. I don't have a special interest. I'm not trying to line the pockets of my own nonprofit. We're a humble $500,000 operation, of which I volunteered for the first 28 months. So we're really just about saving lives and pulling back the curtain in Olympia on all issues like education, like transportation, like public safety and the environment, and the ferry crisis, and all of these issues that I'm learning rapidly, but with a pragmatic take, with open ears, a common heart, and a work ethic that's unmatched. And so I'm happy to be here today as your neighbor, your colleague, your friend, and your soon to be, I hope, elected state representative. So with that, I'll open it up for Q&A.
Oh, that was perfect, Andrea. That was almost exactly 5 minutes. So thank you. So we'll go through we'll rifle through these 3 pre-selected questions that we asked everybody to prepare, and then we have 10 minutes left. So we'll start with number 1, and then we can take questions from the audience. If elected, what is the most important bill you would introduce during the 2025 legislative session?
Well, I'm about saving lives, and I want to deeply understand the mechanisms to enacting Ricky's Law, which is a involuntary hold for somebody who is of grave danger to themselves and others. From my understanding, it's already in place and passed by a very progressive caucus sponsored by Lauren Davis. And I want to understand why we're not utilizing that as a tool to help save lives right now. Seattle Times did a piece in April around how only 50% of the beds that have been secured for Ricky's Law across the state are being utilized. Let me repeat that. 50% of the beds are being utilized for Ricky's Law. Meanwhile, we're losing 4 people a day in King County. Meanwhile, if we look back over the last 2 decades, imagine 66 airplanes have fallen from the sky due to overdose death. We keep throwing more money, more time, more resources, more services on top of services without better outcomes. So I'm very eager to get into Olympia and start looking at why aren't these already in place laws being exercised, and if is there friction? Is there something about Ricky's Law that's not enabling our combination of outreach, social services, and law enforcement and the court to better utilize Ricky's Law as it sits today? Maybe it's just a small amendment to that law, and that's the first one that I'm going to look into. Help people get off the streets. There's absolutely nothing humane about us all walking around downtown and seeing people languish and die right before our eyes. Enough is enough.
Okay, great. That was exactly 2 minutes. You're very well practiced at this. If elected, what specific measures would you take to support the balance between environmental justice and housing affordability? And it's a 2-part question. Do you support, oppose, or take another position relative to ballot initiative 2066?
Is 2066 the Climate Commitment Act?
That's the don't get rid of our natural gas.
Okay, here's my high-level pitch on the initiatives. So of the 3 that are on the ballot, which is the Climate Commitment Act and the gas tax and repealing the ban on natural gas, my position as it sits right now is I oppose to all 3 as it sits right now. However, as a legislator, I want to go back in and amend and make them those equitable for all, especially our hardworking, middle-class, rural union workers that need an option to economically heat their house. So that's my position on that. I think, you all know, I have got to be the #1 environmentalist ever right now. I'm sorry, but who else has picked up 1.3 million pounds of trash with their hands, with volunteers, not taking taxpayer money, relieved our soil of suffocation from plastics and metals and tires and propane and mattresses and human waste and tents and tarps suffocating our soil? Our soil is the #1 way we can offset carbon poison in our atmosphere, right? Like the soil is the skin of Earth, and we do nothing in the state of Washington to actually take care of our green spaces. And it's just so hypocritical to me that we're talking about taking away people's choice and how they heat their home and taxing people on gas when they need to commute an hour from rural communities into inner cities. It's not fair or equitable at all. So one of the first things I will do in Olympia is to dig in and right set those so it is fair for all. And again, I go back to my 4-way test with Rotary. Is it beneficial for all? And are we looking at things so far out there that we're losing sight of what's right in front of us? And why I want to take my groundwork from We Heart Seattle to Olympia for better outcomes.
Great, thank you. So can you just to hit on the first part of that 2-part question, how do you balance that with housing affordability? Save the planet, but also keep things affordable. And then we'll move on to the 3rd question.
Sure, sorry, yeah, really 2 different subjects in my opinion, but housing affordability, I've talked to so many stakeholders in this space. One big group hug to Amazon, who has stood up more than 8,000 homes through the Amazon Equity Fund. Not popular to say in the 43rd, but come on. Amazon's giving free money to affordable housing developers all over our region, including 2 other major cities. We need to be embracing relationships with corporations that are willing to give developers free money, bring up supply and drive down rental costs and the ability to afford your first home. Also, we have stopped building condos. Why? Because of condo liability laws have put developers on a time out because of risk. And we need to follow and model what Canada's doing, which puts a sort of a sidestep insurance pool for developers to go ahead and build condominiums. Who here is a first-time home buyer in Condo Connection who bought their condo as a way to increase their wealth and equity? And my opponent doesn't want people to have wealth. He doesn't want people to have equity. So cut the red tape, restructure some laws around first-time home buyers, remove the barriers, cut the red tape, cut red tape to build.
Okay, perfect. And our third question, there's 4 minutes left. If elected, how would you support progressing community association statutory reform? And do you have any specific proposals to do so?
Okay, you're going to have to break that one down for my little brain here, Steve. It feels like that one came right out of your pocket there. Community association. So
that's us.
Yeah, right.
That's condos and HOAs. So what, do you have any proposals to, there's been a lot of reform actually in the past few years. And how would you support that or not? And what proposals do you have?
So high level, everything that I am not feeling comfortable in the weeds of as of yet. I am a learner. I'm a collaborative leader. I'm a listener, and I work with everybody in here on all sides. I don't bring ideology or right or left wingism to my decision making. So I am obviously a stakeholder here as a condo owner here at the Austin Bell. Things like VRBO laws. I mean, half my building are now short-term rentals. We are now discussing things like should short-term rental owners have a different cost per square foot for their HOA dues. I mean, it's big. Like the wear and tear on our buildings is largely caused now by short-term rentals. Should they pay more into the mid? I think we need to look at everything and agree that there should be reform. And I want to get into the weeds in it with you, Steve, and with this association citywide and extrapolate statewide for better outcomes that are equitable for all.
Okay, there's a little over 2 minutes left. Does anybody from the audience just want to go ahead and ask a question? Please do.
Hi, I have a question. Thank you very much for your time and for coming up to speak with us today. I wanted to ask, over the last couple of months, you've agreed to appear as a keynote speaker at multiple local Republican events, including the North King County Federation of Republican Women meeting earlier this month, as well as the annual King County Republican fundraising dinner. Could you please talk about your decision to run as a Democrat while stumping and fundraising for the people behind Project 2025?
Thank you, Emily. As a founder and executive director of We Heart Seattle, I am a subject matter expert on homelessness, the drug epidemic, and the intersections with the environmental decimation and public safety. I have spoken at more than 100 Rotarian clubs, high schoolers, junior high, colleges, and professors worldwide, including members of all parties, including our Republican Party. In fact, the King County GOP invited me to be a keynote at their Lincoln Day dinner, and were offering me $5,000 that would go to my program that houses babies. Okay, so yes, absolutely, I am going to be a keynote to share my story and to work with everybody and to have dinner with everybody and to listen and share how my model has removed trash and helped people get off the streets. That money would have gone directly to my program. Instead, when I filed, they rescinded their offer for me to speak. So I never went to that event, as it turns out. To be honest, I think it's good that we have dinner with each other and share our solutions. Listening is good. Not listening to each other is the antithesis of democracy. And to this day, I honestly wish that we could have still had that dinner together. For the other one, it was a women's group in Bothell. They also offered me to keynote. Once I filed, they also rescinded the offer for me to keynote as part of their own bylaw. And so I have not gone to either one of those. There's also been other speaking engagements that I do as a public speaker to fund my nonprofit who've rescinded offers because it's against their bylaws to have running candidates do keynotes out of conflict of interest. So I've been actually way above board. The way I look at it is when they rescinded their offer, and to address your concern directly, Emily, we just put $5,000 back into the Republicans' agenda instead of giving it to a little nonprofit called We Heart Seattle that picks up trash and helps the homeless.
That's we are at the end of our 15 minutes. The next candidate, as we mentioned, won't be here until about 5:30. So we're gonna stop there for now, and we'll restart when the next candidate arrives. But we want to thank you very much, Andrea. Thanks everybody for attending. And
can you hear me okay?
yeah, we got you. Can you hear?
Yeah, I sure can. Sorry about that. I'm taking this meeting on my way to do some voter outreach over at Capitol Hill Farmers Market. So it's great to be with everybody virtually.
Thank you so much for joining. Yeah, I'm Steve Horvath. We're recording and transcribing, and we'll get right to it so that we give you your full 15 minutes. So the first 5 minutes is intended to be kind of your elevator pitch, whatever you'd like for us. And then we have our 3 questions that we sent you. And if there's more time, questions from the audience. So we'll let you go ahead and introduce yourself and get rolling.
Absolutely. Well, my name is Sean Scott, running to represent the people of the 43rd Legislative District. In our district, in the 43rd, we are parents and students and teachers in state schools, public schools, universities, community colleges. We are 70% renter in the 43rd LD. And historically, representatives from the 43rd LD have played a very important role in setting the pace for what progressive legislation looks like in the rest of the state legislature. And that's a big part of the reason why I'm running. I believe that we can be a state that stands up for working people, that addresses our most pressing issues, housing security, houselessness, funding education, taking action on climate change. And to that end, I have been endorsed in this race by almost every labor organization that has endorsed in this election, every environmental organization that has endorsed. I have the support of Representative Nicole Macri, who would be my seatmate, the support of the 43rd LD Democrats, and also the support of my predecessor in this seat, Representative Frank Chop, who's been a tremendous friend and mentor in this process of attempting to stick up for the 43rd LD in the state legislature. So I look forward to questions that folks might have, and look forward to answering those all.
Okay, great, thank you. Well, we'll roll right into our 3 questions, and then should have probably some extra time left for. Oh, there we got you on video. Great. So our first question is, if elected, what's the most important bill you would introduce during the 2025 legislative session?
So the question is around the most important bill that I would introduce in the 2025 legislative session. And this is such an important question because there are so many pressing needs, and you only get so many bills that you can really introduce as a freshman lawmaker, and only so many that you can introduce and advocate for effectively. I would have to say that the bill around finding a revenue fix for keeping our schools open in the state of Washington would be my first priority. The fact that we are getting ready to close 20 public schools in the city of Seattle, with many other districts facing similar closures as a result of enrollment crises, to me is unthinkable, especially in a state with as many resources as we have. There could not be a more short-sighted way of governing than to have our state schools closed down at this particular juncture. So I want to find a revenue fix for keeping our schools open. Raising the cap on special education, I believe, would be part of that fix. I think that we have a source of revenue that we can identify in the oil spill prevention tax, which I've talked about in the course of the campaign trail. I think that there's some portion of a real estate excise tax, which is a tax on huge multinational real estate transactions part of that, obviously, the lion's share of that would go towards affordable housing and social housing. And I think that there's a good sum of that that might be able to go towards general neighborhood improvement for the new housing that we're building. And I think some of that has to be considered for schools as well. So I would definitely say that front of mind for me is a revenue fix for keeping our schools open.
Perfect. Thank you. Our second question, it's a two-parter. If elected, what specific measures would you take to support the balance between environmental justice and housing affordability? And do you support, oppose, or take another position on ballot initiative 2066, which is I colloquially refer to it as the Let Us Keep Our Natural Gas initiative?
Mm-hmm. So I think that for too often we have been accustomed to thinking of the situation with respect to housing and environmental preservation in oppositional terms. And I think that we have severed a political coalition. We have established a divide, I should say, that has harmed our ability to reach both of those goals, if that makes sense. When we have folks thinking about the environment and our environmental concerns as separate from needing to have good dense neighborhoods with a lot of green space, when that concern is thought of as separate from protecting the tree canopy, for example, or mass transit, nobody gets what they want. And if you notice the state of the discussion around environmental concerns and protections and housing, there's dissatisfaction on both sides. And part of me wonders whether or not that's because we have not been working in as much coalition on this issue as we ought to have. So I'm somebody who comes from the school of thought who says, here in the Evergreen State, one of the things that we're most proud of, the bluest skies, the green trees, great green spaces, public parks, those are all made better and improved when we have dense housing options for people to be able to enjoy them. Fewer road space that's given, or fewer public space that's given over to automobiles, more people able to travel mass transit on foot, on bicycle. So that I think that we ought to be doing more to reconcile those two strands of thought. And I know that the transit-oriented development bill and measures that my colleagues in the state legislature, Representative Jessica Bateman, who's endorsed me in this race in specific, has thought about that in a very far-reaching way. So that's a coalition that I hope to help build. With respect to the gas tax that you mentioned, I think that part of the reason why we're in this predicament is because we have too many regressive forms of revenue in the state of Washington, so that when we have gas taxes, property taxes, sales taxes, those are always going to come under more fire because there are more taxpayers and more people who are going to be susceptible to paying those taxes and those revenue sources than would be the case if we had a tax on extreme wealth, if we had a tax on excess compensation, if we had a tax on the kinds of wealth that is not held by everyday people and everyday Washingtonians. It'd be less susceptible to the sorts of political backlash that I think we've seen, somewhat justifiably, I should say, amongst folks that are kind of experiencing tax fatigue. So it's a very complex set of questions that you asked, a very good question, and that's kind of where I stand on those issues, just making sure that we're reconciling the divide between housing and environmentalism with transit-oriented development on the one hand, and addressing our revenue concerns with sustainable progressive revenue that don't fall so much on everyday and working Washingtonians.
Great, thank you. And our last pre-selected question, if elected, how would you support progressing community associations statutory reform? And do you have any specific proposals to do so? And just to break down, community associations are the group of folks that you largely have on this call today, people in condos, people that live in HOAs. Those are community associations.
Absolutely. Well, I just not too long ago read, I think it was fellow's name is Jim Deers, was the director of the Seattle Department of Neighborhoods for many years. He wrote a book called Neighbor Power. And he really talked about in that book how neighborhood associations are sort of the font of a lot of power that has kind of been lost in many ways in the city, at the city level. I think that I saw one example or one legacy of those neighborhood councils just when I was canvassing a little while ago in Wallingford, where you have traffic roundabouts that were installed increasingly in the 1970s in the city of Seattle as a way of dampening the speed of many cars that were going through the neighborhood. And I mean, if you think that was a concern in the 70s, obviously now we have far too many pedestrian deaths. We have very unsafe streets. So neighborhood councils, I think, play a very specific role in addressing those kinds of street safety concerns. So where we do not have neighborhood councils formally established in the way that they maybe used to be, I think that hearing directly from my constituents who may be part of those HOAs is one way that we can get at a replication of that kind of neighborhood power. I want to be able to hear from people who are in Laurelhurst, who are in Montlake, who are in South Lake Union, East Lake, excuse me, in residential heavy neighborhoods in my city or in my district, because I know that the concerns that they are facing are really not all that separate from the ones that folks might be facing in Capitol Hill or the University District or South Lake Union, some areas that are more dense. So I think it has to do with, the best window that we have into how somebody is going to govern or legislate has to do with how you're campaigning. So I'm spending a lot of time knocking doors, hearing directly from people who are in Wallingford, directly from people that are in Montlake and Eastlake, because I want that relationship established. My predecessor in this role, I think, was somebody who was a master at constituent services, being able to reply and respond to community needs as they arose. So I think it has to do with the fact that I've been as somebody who's been campaigning, I have been doing this outreach, and I hope to continue and take that relationship and those relationships that are being built with me to Olympia to address everything from street safety to neighborhood and park cleanup to schools and housing, which we've talked about before.
Great, thank you. All right, we have about 5 minutes, a little under 5. Are there any questions from the audience?
I'd like to start off with a question for Sean. Sean, hi, I'm Tina Beek. I live downtown in a condo. And I guess what I'd like to know from you is you're not going to be able to knock on every single door in the district, right? So what is the best way for someone like me or anybody else who's interested to actually get our concerns in front of your campaign in a meaningful way?
Yeah, so it's a very, very good question and a valid concern. A lot of doors in our district with 93,000 registered voters. I would say I'm somebody who monitors personally our campaign's info account, so the general info account where people can let us know about everything from policy concerns that they would like to see addressed on our campaign website. People have asked for yard signs at info@betterwashington.org. People have let us know some other policy concerns that they would like to see us address, specifically with respect to accessibility. So I would say, Tina, I would appreciate your feedback at our campaign's info email address, which is info@betterwashington.org. And also my personal cell phone number, 206-437-7826. Have had a lot of folks call me directly to offer advice, to let me know about things they're frustrated about in the district, aspirations that they would like to have. So we'd love to hear from my constituents any way that I can. info@betterwashington.org. And also my personal cell phone number is 206-437-7826.
Very brave. That's on the recording and transcription. So I commend you for that. Anybody? We have about 3 minutes.
I have a question for you, Sean. Thank you very much for coming and speaking to us today. My question is about mental health funding and drug treatment, which I think people on all sides of the aisle would agree is a pretty significant issue here in Seattle, and particularly in your district. What would you do as a state legislator to make mental health and drug treatment more available?
Yeah, so this is, I would have to say, Emily, one of the top 2 or 3 concerns that I hear from folks when I'm attempting to knock on every door. Tina was quite accurate in saying that it's going to be pretty impossible to knock on every single one of them. Not going to stop me from trying, but when I am at the doors, this is a concern that I hear about quite a lot. I've been endorsed in this race by 2 King County Council members, that is County Council Member Teresa Mosqueda and County Council Member Gramai Zahalai, and also by Representative Tina Orwall. The motivating conversations that I had with those 3 sitting elected officials was all around coordinating state and county response for behavioral and mental health services. Most of the monies that we have to address behavioral health services and mental health services do flow through King County. So there are a few things that we need to do to make sure that those services remain or are funded and scaled at a greater level than they are presently. The first of those is to give counties the revenue, the taxing authority that they need in order to collect the revenue themselves that they need to address those issues. And the second is the state could be doing a lot to procure some of that revenue ourselves. I think that there are three components in general to the situation with respect to housing people who are currently experiencing houselessness. The first has to do with outreach. The second has to do with making sure that there are enough housing and enough shelter beds. But the third component, and this is speaking to your question, is what we've lost too much sight of over recent years, which is funding the behavioral health services, using housing as a way of connecting people to services, understanding that some people might be experiencing houselessness for a variety of different directions, but one of the major reasons, but one of the major components that we see in our houseless or population of people experiencing houselessness has to do with mental health challenges. So if we want to address that issue, we have to first get the revenue situation right. And that has to do with giving counties in specific the funding that they need to scale up and coordinate responses on this issue that work. I've talked to co-lead at Civic Hotel, the Youth Services Orion Center, and they say, we are model programs. Others in the state legislature have said that, but it's time for us to put a funding commitment behind the nice words and realize that those programs can't do that work without the money that they need. So we have to coordinate that at the state and at the county level, Emily.
Thank you, Sean. That was our 15 minutes. Really appreciate your time. Oh, and Daniel is waiting to come in. So
Excellent.
Thank you again.
Well, I guess everybody gets their 15 minutes of fame, and there was mine. So thanks a lot, everybody. Great speaking with everybody. I hope it goes well with the rest of the candidates.
Thanks, Sean.
Have a
Bye-bye.
good night. Hey, thanks for joining us tonight. I'm Steve Horvath. You're our last candidate to speak to us. Thanks so much for joining. We're giving everybody 15 minutes, and as we let you know, the format will be about 5 minutes to give your elevator pitch, and then we'll throw our pre-selected questions, and if there's extra time, take a couple questions from the audience. So I'll just jump right in and let you go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us what your campaign's about.
Got it. Thank you. Thanks for the invite. So yeah, as you can probably gather, I'm Daniel Carasello, running for state representative of the 43rd Legislative District. A little bit about myself personally. My mother fled Cuba with her family during the Communist Revolution in the late 50s. I actually grew up in Miami, Florida, and grew up among the Cuban exile community. This really shaped my political worldview, to say the least. I've since naturally become a resident Seattleite here. After falling in love with the city during my undergraduate years, it continues to inspire me every day, and I passionately engage in all the amenities that this wonderful spot in the nation has to offer. Now, I believe the best utilization of my skills would be to serve as this district's representative. My goal really is to accurately represent this district. So what do I mean by that? Well, we have an incredibly diverse district, both in the demographic of people and our differences in political thought. I like to think I share that same diversity, and my diverse experiences will allow me to just bridge the gap between the average resident of the 43rd and the state government. I'm not going in with just one or two pet projects. I want to make sure that the issues I champion and support stretch across a whole spectrum of topics. So like some of my opponents, I want to ensure housing is more affordable, though I know that we have different strategies on how to accomplish that. I want to create new recycling initiatives to incentivize environmental awareness. As someone with a postgraduate degree in information management and also several years working in the technology industry, I feel that I'm well positioned to create some thoughtful technology policy, data privacy policy. I also want to see increases in our investments into education and infrastructure, just to ensure that everyone has access to the cornerstones of what make a functioning society. So to accomplish all these ambitious goals, I think our district needs someone who has the experience and desire to work with people of all backgrounds, even those who may not initially support your same ideas. In my professional endeavors, I've worked closely with Democrats, I've worked closely with Republicans, I've worked in nonpartisan capacities as well. But just in general, I know how to interact with and appeal to each side so that we can mitigate any gridlock and partisanship, work together collaboratively. We can create meaningful change in our state. We can leave the partisan politics for our federal representatives in DC. My opponent, Sean, one of his major claims to the seat is his legislative knowledge. Well, I have extensive political and legislative experience, both in academia and professionally. I have a bachelor's degree in political science. I have a master's in applied American politics and policy. I've worked for 3 years at a legislative tracking service, advising lawmakers, lobbyists, and advocacy groups on legislative procedure, state processes. So I feel like I can match that and beyond. One of Andrea Suarez's major claims is her experience managing her organization's multi-million-dollar budget. Well, on a daily basis in my current position, I manage multiple multi-million-dollar contracts at my day job. As I've been going around, knocking on doors, meeting residents, and learning about the salient issues to Washingtonians, I've been met with extremely positive feedback. But one thing that always gets brought up is, wow, you're young. My response is always the same. You know, I might be young, but in a fraction of years, I've gained more than twofold the legislative experience my opponents have. And additionally, at the national level, really every level, but especially right now at the presidential level, we have people calling for younger politicians, fresh new perspectives. I think I could bring that progressivism, but without radicalism. So with all that said, I like to think I'm the balanced, pragmatic candidate in this race.
Great, thank you. All right, we'll dive into our 3 pre-selected questions and then take some additional ones if we have time. So if elected, what's the most important bill you would introduce during the 2025 legislative session?
Yeah, so like I said, I have a lot of topics that I would like to cover as a legislator, but I think one of my most important ones would be AI regulation. This is something that's going to be really paramount in the coming years with the advent of AI just as an emerging technology. The United States generally takes a bottom-up approach when it comes to regulation. Right now, there are no current comprehensive AI or data privacy laws at the federal level. So I think Washington, who's usually at the forefront of technology issues, can continue to do so if I'm elected. I would love to champion strong, comprehensive data privacy laws. We did something similar a couple of years ago with the My Health, My Data plan, but it was narrow in scope to just health data. But like I said, AI is going to be a continued emerging threat to just consumer protections. It's going to create skill gaps in our economy, which could lead to unemployment. I want to still foster innovation of AI, don't get me wrong, but I want to make sure that we have the right transparency when it comes to like the ethical deployment of AI and its various applications. And I also want to see upskilling programs, retraining programs for those who have been displaced by AI. And also something similar to what the EU did with their regulations, where they were able to categorize different AI based off of its risk, from unacceptable, like facial recognition and biometric recognition and applications of AI, to high risk, to just low risk of just like response generation or like photo editing. But yeah, so I think it would just be a thoughtful technology policy that still fosters innovation, but maintains consumer protections, data privacy, and ethical deployment of AI.
Great, thank you. All right, the second one's a 2-part question. If elected, what specific measures would you take to support the balance between environmental justice and housing affordability? And the second part is, do you support, oppose, or take another position relative to ballot initiative 2066, which is the, I call it the Let's Keep Our Natural Gas initiative?
Sure. So when it comes to housing affordability, I know that I differ from my candidates, from the other candidates, from my opponents here. One of the things that I'm generally hesitant to support are strict measures of rent control. The reason why is I feel as though it freezes up the supply of housing. I think it dissuades developers from building additional housing, which I think is the core issue of housing, really. We have people for decades saying that our housing is unaffordable, but then support measures that don't allow more housing to be built. So with that said, I think I want to see more bills that ease restrictions in the permitting process. I want to see more bills that streamline that permitting process for developers. I want to work closely with building associations to make sure that developers have the right incentives to build more housing. But all of that is tied to environmental sustainability, because a lot of those regulations may have to do with environmental restrictions. I want to make sure that those are still on the board, but we could cut some red tape elsewhere. But in relation to the environment, I'm sorry, I just losing my train of thought here, but the initiative, the 2066, I do not support it. Not, at least I'm gonna vote no on it. That's my open position. I don't think it'd be disastrous if it passes. I think it was proposed under the guise that it will allow people to maintain natural gas. It will stop a ban on natural gas, but the bill that it's looking to repeal a lot of provisions for doesn't outright ban natural gas. I think it just leads to a nice streamlined process of a transition into more renewable sources. At the same time, like I said, I don't think it would be disastrous if it ends up passing. I think we'll just have to look at other ways that we could balance environmental sustainability, environmental awareness with economic viability. But yeah, I don't support the initiative, and I will be voting no on that.
Great, thank you. And our third question, if elected, how would you support progressing community association statutory reform, community associations being condos and HOAs? And do you have any specific proposals to do so?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think in general, when it comes to this question, you know, I'm going in there, I'm not going to be an expert on every single issue, but I am committed to working collaboratively with the organizations that are closest to the issues to make sure that we could create that thoughtful policy. I'm not going in here as an extremist. I'm definitely open to different perspectives. That said, community associations, COAs, HOAs, just they play a crucial role in just maintaining property values, quality of life. I want to make sure that I'm supporting reforms that ensure that these associations are operating fairly, transparently, efficiently. I've noticed that a lot of organizations speak to transparency or increased transparency as a solution. So residents should have, you know, clear access to associated budgets or meetings, decision-making processes. I would love to make sure that transparency across the board and just education on these issues is rampant. Also, I want to make sure that there's standardized dispute resolution mechanisms, because I know that a lot of disputes within associations can be costly and divisive for residents. So making sure that those mediation or arbitration processes can be more efficient and less adversarial, that'd be good, I think. Another thing would just be in general enhancing consumer protection, making sure that association boards are held accountable and that the residents have recourse if their rights are violated. So just maybe stricter regulations on elections, or again, going back to the transparency issue, or dissolution of HOAs or COAs if necessary. But just in general, I want to focus on dispute resolution, consumer protection, and transparency when it comes to that. But again, working with the associated organizations that work closer to that issue, that know a lot more than I do, really.
Great, thank you. We have 3.5 minutes. We'll take any questions from the audience.
Well, I'll jump in and ask a question that I've been asking, and that is, since you can't possibly knock on everybody's door, what is the best way for individuals to get their concerns in front of your campaign in a meaningful way?
Sure. Well, I'm running my campaign like I would run my office as a legislator, an open door policy. I want to see transparency. People can email me. I have the contact info right on my website. No, I can't knock on every single door, but you know, we're trying to use our campaign funds appropriately to make sure that we reach the masses and send tens of thousands of mailers to houses to make sure that our name can get out there and that they could see my website, that they could see where they could contact me to bring up their issues. And I've had people do so. which is positive. It's been a positive experience, really.
2.5 minutes. Who has a question for Daniel?
I have an unrelated to politics one if nobody else has anything. Yeah.
Go for it.
I want to talk about AI cloning
Mhm.
and whether or not you have any perspective on that and how you would include that in regulation, like the HeyGen stuff that's happening, and some of the other tools for actually being fake people, convincing fake
Yeah.
people.
Yeah, so when it comes to just AI cloning, whether that be voice or really modification of images, videos, and the fake people, as you mentioned, this is something that would be classified as high risk in EU terms when they recently came up with their regulations. And I would like to do the same. I don't want to. I'm very hesitant to support just outright bans for a lot of different things. But when it comes to this, I would be hesitant to support an outright ban, but I want strict regulations on AI cloning. I want to make sure that it is widely known as a high risk deployment of and use case of AI. A lot of the issue with when it comes to AI is where it receives its data, the repositories in which it receives its data. And those repositories could hold biased data, it could hold misinformation. So transparency into what those repositories look like, how the AI is being deployed, will allow it so people could have a little bit more insight as to what is misinformation, what can lead to inherent biases. But yeah, it would definitely, in relation to your question, it would be a high risk deployment of AI, which I want strict regulation for.
30 seconds. Any last parting thoughts for us, Daniel?
In 30 seconds, all I have to say is thank you for inviting all the candidates. It's been a real pleasure getting to know all these people. Again, I'm young, so this is my first experience as a candidate, as would be a legislator. I know that that's the same for all of us candidates. But meeting with all these organizations, meeting with all the residents, all these voters, and learning about what's important has been really eye-opening. And such an incredible learning experience that I hope to take to Olympia. And if not, it will stick with me forever. And I hope to, run again in the future.
Thank you. Thank you very much for coming tonight, answering our questions. Thanks everybody who participated.